What's the difference between a 6700 and a 9070? 6 and a 9. Look, I refreshed an RX 9070 product page on Best Buy and I saw it was in stock, at MSRP, available for shipping, and available to buy now. So I bought it, and now we're here. Do I regret it? Could I still skate by with my RX 6700 XT? All this and more in my review of the AMD Radeon RX 9070. I've had my 6700 XT for a little over 3 years right now, and while it's certainly no slouch at 1080p gaming, it's starting to show its age in some newer titles and higher resolutions. It came out over 4 years ago in March of 2021 at an MSRP of $480, though whether or not that price is actually attainable is debatable. It was dark times back then. In fact, it was so dark that I actually bought this card a year later in March 2022, and it was still above MSRP. Fast forward to 2025, and the 9070 and 9070 XT launched at MSRPs of $550 and $600 respectively. With AMD once again foregoing the ultra high-end market, these cards would be the top end of their 9000 series, competing directly against Nvidia's RTX 5070 and 5070 Ti. While both pairs of cards are competitive, my intent with this video is to see how much of an uplift the 9070 is versus my old card, and whether it's worth the $550 that I managed to snag the 9070 at. First, a quick overview. The 6700 XT is based on AMD's RDNA 2 architecture and is built on TSMC's 7nm process node, while the 9070 is based on AMD's RDNA 4 architecture built on the 4nm process. The 6700 XT is a PCIe Gen 4 card, while the 9070 is a PCIe Gen 5 card. Both have GDDR6 as their memory, but the 6700 XT has 12GB on a 192-bit memory bus, while the 9070 has a 16GB on a 256-bit memory bus. As you probably could just tell, I can't really talk too much more about these two architectures without sounding like I'm reading straight off a spec sheet, so I'm going to jump straight to the test setup. The first card in question was the Gigabyte Eagle RX 6700 XT, a 3-slot card. It's a 3-fan card that stayed pretty quiet while it was on my gaming rig. If I'm this Gigabyte card, then this XFX card is the guy she told me not to worry about. True story. This is the XFX RX 9070, a 3.5-slot card that is quite the behemoth. It's also a 3-fan card. Both cards sport unintrusive, if tasteful backplates and have minimal RGB, mainly for their respective logos. For power delivery, the Gigabyte 6700 XT requires one 8-pin and one 6-pin, while the XFX 9070 requires two 8-pins. Finally, for displays, the Gigabyte 6700 XT has two DisplayPort 1.48 ports and two HDMI 2.1 ports, while the XFX 9070 drops down to one HDMI 2.1 port in favor of three DisplayPort 2.1 ports. All testing was done on my main computer, which consists of a Ryzen 9 3900X on an MSI B350 Gaming Plus motherboard. This setup is starting to show its age, but the 3900X is still going strong for me, and I'm trying to continue using this setup for as long as I can. Frame time data was captured using CapFrameX at 1080p, 1440p, and 2160p, as well as ultra-wide resolutions when available. The first game in the mix is Assassin's Creed Shadows, the most recent title of my test suite. Before I dive into the details, I want to note that I've grouped comparative data by resolution, which you can see on the far left side of each graph. The RX 9070 numbers are in blue, and the RX 6700 XT numbers are in red, with lighter hues of both colors representing the average frame rates. In Assassin's Creed Shadows, the RX 9070 was nearly twice as fast as the 6700 XT across all the tested resolutions. More importantly, it brought 1440p and ultra-wide 1080p to very playable states, and this is without any upscaling or frame generation being used. The next title is Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. I have a soft spot for this game and find it very enjoyable to play. The RX 9070 has a similar effect here, with it being twice as performant as the 6700 XT across the board. Batman Arkham Knight is the oldest title in my suite, and as such was already running very well on the 6700 XT, especially at 1080p and 1440p. However, the 9070 dramatically increases the performance at 2160p by 73% and increases 1440p performance by 11%. Unfortunately, the built-in benchmark is buggy when the game runs at ultra-wide resolutions, so measurements at these resolutions were not obtained. Black Myth Wukong is quickly becoming a favorite of mine and quite frankly was the main motivator for me to upgrade my graphics card in the first place. The 6700 XT struggled to hit 60 FPS consistently at 1080p, but now the 9070 comfortably delivers above 60 FPS. Across the resolutions tested, the 9070 is twice as fast as the 6700 XT in this title. Days Gone is a game I've grown to have a love-hate relationship with, but that explanation is far more deserving of its own video. Regardless, the Broken Road DLC has sucked me back in, and while this RX 6700 XT was already playing this game pretty well, the 9070 adds more headroom. At 2160p, the 9070 delivers nearly 60 FPS at all times, and the average frame rate sees a 76% increase. At 1440p, the 9070 bests the 6700 XT by 55%, and at 1080p, frame rates see an increase of 19%. Ultra-wide resolutions also see similar performance increases. Forza Horizon 5 is one of my favorite racing games that I can lose countless hours in. While I still have a preference to Forza Horizon 4's gameplay, Horizon 5's setting is more relaxing to drive through, but I digress. I want to preface that this game was the only game in the suite that ran off of a hard drive instead of the internal SSD due to space restrictions. Similar to its performance in Days Gone, the 6700 XT delivers respectable numbers in Forza Horizon 5, but the 9070 increases those numbers further. At 2160p, we see an 83% performance increase with the RX 9070, and more importantly, the game is brought comfortably above 60 FPS. We see a 54% increase at 1440p and a 41% increase at 1080p. There are also healthy gains at the ultra-wide resolutions, with a 68% increase at 1440p ultra-wide and 43% increase at 1080p ultra-wide. Ghost of Tsushima is another one of my favorites, with it being responsible for hundreds of hours of my time on PS4. I picked one of the more intense duels of the game as my benchmark. At 2160p, the RX 9070 is twice as fast as the RX 6700 XT, though it still can't hit 60 FPS at these settings. At 1440p, the RX 9070 shows an 81% increase and brings the 1% low frame rate to above 60. At 1080p, we see a 56% uplift. Ultrawide is my preferred way to play Tsushima, so I'm happy to see significant performance improvements at the ultra-wide resolutions. It's been a while since I played GTA 5 from start to finish, but when the enhanced version came out on PC earlier this year, I knew I had to include it in my benchmark suite. At resolutions greater than 1080p, the RX 9070 shows the greatest differentials, especially at 2160p where the RX 9070 is more than twice as fast as the RX 6700 XT. Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered is the first game where we see both significant gains at 2160p and basically no gains at 1080p. While other games such as Arkham Knight were hinting at this pattern, Zero Dawn Remastered shows this pattern outright. If Zero Dawn Remastered is a large part of your playtime and you're playing primarily at 1080p or even 1440p, then the 6700 XT will still serve you just fine. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is one of my favorite games of all time and one I hope continues to find bigger and bigger audiences. This was a fairly heavy game to run at the time of its 2021 release. Similar to Zero Dawn Remastered and Arkham Knight, gains at 1080p are very low, but you'll still see noticeable improvements at higher resolutions. Like the other games in my suite, the RX 9070 delivers a 93 performance improvement at 2160p and a 36 performance improvement at 1440p. The Last of Us Part 1 is infamous for being one of the worst PC launches of all time, and perhaps more importantly, the first time Sony fumbled a launch of one of their PC ports. Regardless, it seems most of the issues have been ironed out a couple years later. Like Black Myth Wukong, this was another game that motivated me to upgrade my graphics card, as the 6700 XT struggled to hit 60 FPS at 1080p. At 2160p, the 9070 is twice as fast as the 6700 XT. At 1440p and 1440p ultra-wide, the 9070 is 80% faster and brings the game above 60 FPS at nearly all times. Less dramatic but still notable performance improvements are seen with the 1080p and 1080p ultra-wide results. Closing out the non-ray-tracing section of this video is Uncharted 4, which is a part of the Legacy of Thieves release on PC. I truly have a love-hate relationship with this PC port because it would constantly crash my 6700 XT in the first month of the game's 2022 release. It's been nearly 3 years and sometimes it's still touch and go, but for the most part the game runs crash-free. In the combat-heavy market escape encounter, the 9070 comfortably runs this game north of 60 FPS across all resolutions, with it being more than twice as fast at 2160p and nearly twice as fast at 1440p ultra-wide. I want to briefly touch on ray tracing as it's a marketing point that all the GPU companies like to talk about. I tested 2 games with ray tracing, Black Myth Wukong and Guardians of the Galaxy. As expected with Wukong, noticeable performance gains are definitely seen, but in reality the slideshow simply becomes a slightly smoother slideshow. Regardless, the 9070 is 3 times as performant as the 6700 XT in this case. With that said, Wukong is still a heavy game to run and still feels like it needs more optimization fixes. When looking at the performance loss when enabling ray tracing, at least 70% of the average frame rate is lost regardless of the GPU and resolution tested. Remember, in this graph, the bigger the bar is, the lower the average frame rate was. The 9070 takes less of a hit than the 6700 XT, but ray tracing is still a massive endeavor in this game for both cards. Guardians of the Galaxy with ray tracing is a more optimistic ordeal. The 9070 is still a great improvement over the 6700 XT here, with it being at least a 50% improvement at 1080p and more than twice as much at 2160p. The performance loss observed is also much lower with the 9070, making ray-traced gameplay a much more reasonable endeavor. Before we come to a conclusion, let's round out the analysis by looking at the geometric mean of all of the non-ray-traced games. Overall, at 2160p, the 9070 is twice as fast as the 6700 XT, at least in this test suite. At 1440p, the 9070 is 57% faster, and at 1080p, it is 33% faster. The 9070 is 77% faster in 1440p ultra-wide and 39% faster in 1080p ultra-wide. As we approach the conclusion, I want to address a couple potentially big elephants in the room that I've avoided talking about. Yep. Frame upscaling and frame generation. For those unaware, frame upscaling is the concept of rendering a frame at a lower resolution and then using an algorithm to upscale the frame at the desired resolution. Oftentimes, a series of previous frames are used in this process to accurately upscale the next frame. If the implementation is sound, the result is a higher frame rate with little loss to image quality because the GPU is internally rendering at a lower resolution, lightening its load, and thus delivering more frames. NVIDIA, Intel, and AMD all have their methods for approaching this problem. In all of my testing, I tried to stick to native resolution rendering as much as possible by either disabling any upscaling or setting TSR, or temporal super resolution, to 100%. This was quite simply a personal choice to make testing easier, though I do have some thoughts about this that I'll get to shortly. The second elephant in the room is frame generation. For the uninitiated, the concept is pretty simple. For every real frame that is generated and displayed by the GPU, an interpolated fake frame is generated right after and delivered to the user. In theory, this doubles the number of frames that the GPU is displaying, though in reality it is a little less than 2x because of processing overhead required to generate the fake frame. Frame generation is a relatively new option in PC gaming and is mainly marketed as a way to artificially increase frame rate, whether it's to make the newest graphics cards look way more amazing than they actually are, or to increase the life of older cards that support frame generation but aren't cutting it in the latest games. Here's my issue with these two technologies, and brace yourself because this might be a hot take. I don't think current-gen GPUs should have to rely on either of these two technologies to deliver 60 FPS gameplay in modern games. Don't get me wrong, I don't think every GPU should magically be able to run every game at 4K 60 Ultra Pro Max settings. Not at all, but given reasonable settings, a current-gen GPU of a certain class should be able to deliver a native 60 FPS experience in a current-gen game without the use of upscaling and frame generation. Sadly, more and more high-profile modern releases have come to rely especially on the upscaling technology in their system requirements documentation, which I personally find unacceptable. Frame generation is even more of a red flag for me because it really only delivers proper image quality when the base frame rate is already above 60 FPS. Trying to apply frame generation to a game delivering less than 60 FPS often results in ghosting, increased input lag, and a jarring experience, especially if the base frame rate is too low, which makes it difficult to justify its use in the 6700 XT's case, for example. All of this is to say that I didn't feel comfortable using upscaling and frame generation in my tests because I don't think it's a reasonable justification for game optimization or lack thereof. Obviously, upscaling and frame generation will increase the numbers in my graphs, but the image quality and input latency will be negatively affected in some way which can't be conveyed accurately in my graphs. So, I'm not going to lift up the cards again, because the 9070 is still very heavy, but is it better than the 6700 XT? Yeah, it is. Is it worth the MSRP? That's subjective, but for me in my use case, I think it's worth it. At the very least, I hope you found some usefulness from this video and learned something new. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. In theory, this doubles the number of frames that the GPU is displaying, though in reality... Great. Thank you, dog.